Welcome back to the Quarterly Call. All content is for informational purposes and is not investment advice. Please consult with an investment professional. Uber just had their Q4 2024 earnings call, and wow, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, a lot to unpack for sure.
The main theme I saw, and I think you'll agree, is acceleration.
That's right.
They're not just growing, it seems like they're exceeding expectations across the board. Whether we're talking audience or the number of trips or even revenue, everything seems to be on the upswing.
Absolutely. They are not just growing, they are beating expectations
Yeah.
across the board. Audience, trips, revenue, it's all pointing upwards. Even in fact, their gross bookings growth went above their own guidance,
Wow.
exceeding even the highest projections.
That's really impressive, especially considering everything going on in the economy right now. What would you say is really driving this surge in growth?
It's a couple of things. On the one hand, you see some strong product innovation happening across their whole platform. They're always refining their services, coming up with new features that appeal to riders and drivers alike. But I think maybe even more impactful is the success they're seeing with their Uber One membership.
Yeah, the Uber One numbers are pretty unbelievable.
Really?
They added 5 million members just in Q4.
That's right.
That brings their total membership base to 30 million. That's almost a 60% increase year over year.
It's a testament to the power of these loyalty programs, right?
Yeah.
When you can give members those perks, those discounts, it really makes them more committed and they use your services more often. It's a win-win, I think, for both the company and the customer.
Absolutely. Let's talk about something that I think always gets people talking, autonomous vehicles, or AVs, as I think most people call them.
Right.
Uber made it very clear that they think it will be a while until we see widespread adoption, longer than people think. But that doesn't mean they're shying away from the technology. Actually, they want to be the main partner for AV companies as they roll out.
They're taking a long-term view. Definitely,
Yeah.
Uber sees AVs as the future of transportation.
Right.
They want to be a leader in that revolution. But at the same time, I think they're being realistic about the challenges that need to be addressed before we see AVs everywhere.
What would you say are some of those challenges? I know they mentioned 5 specific ones on the call rep.
They did.
Like, what were some of the things they're really focused on?
Well, first you got regulations.
Okay.
The laws around AVs, they're still changing, and there's a lot we don't know about how these vehicles will work with our existing infrastructure. Then you got the safety issue. Uber believes AVs need to have this almost superhuman level of safety, like way lower accident rates than humans, before people will really get on board.
That makes sense.
It makes sense.
People need to feel like it's safer to be in an AV than in a car with a human driver.
Exactly.
Okay, so safety, regulations, what else?
Well, the tech side of things is still a hurdle.
So?
It's not easy making affordable hardware that can drive in all kinds of environments and be reliable. Then there's the operational side, figuring out how to run a bunch of AVs at once, making sure everything goes smoothly on the ground. And finally, you need to have enough people using the network.
Yeah.
AVs have to be moving all the time, taking people places, moving stuff for it to make financial sense.
It sounds like a pretty long list of challenges, but Uber seems pretty confident they can be the ones to bring the AV companies in the market together.
Right.
What makes them so sure they're the perfect partner for this?
It's the infrastructure they already have and their know-how. They've built this enormous global network for ride-hailing.
Yeah.
And they know how to run it. They know how to connect riders and drivers, make sure the routes are efficient, handle everything that goes into a large-scale transportation platform.
So what you're saying is they're offering a ready-made marketplace for AV companies, which is a big deal in such a new industry.
That's a big advantage.
It is. Now let's look at an example of this partnership idea they have. I know they talked about working with Waymo in Austin, Texas, right?
Yeah, starting next month, people in Austin will be able to get Waymo's self-driving cars right through the Uber app.
Wow.
It's a pilot program that'll let both companies get a bunch of data and feedback on how people use AVs in the real world.
So it's kind of like a win-win. Uber gets to learn more about AVs and their potential impact, and Waymo gets to use Uber's huge rider network.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And for people in Austin, it's a chance to see the future of transportation firsthand.
It's pretty cool. Now, even though Uber is looking ahead to this future with AVs, they're not ignoring their core business, ride-hailing.
Right.
In fact, they're expanding into new markets, especially less populated places like the suburbs.
And that's where their data really comes in handy.
Yeah.
They're not just expanding randomly. They're looking at the data, figuring out the needs and challenges of each area. Like, what kind of challenges are they facing in these less populated areas? What are some of the things they're having to really look at and figure out?
Well, first, you have fewer people, which means fewer people need rides.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it harder to make sure there are enough drivers and keep the wait times reasonable for riders.
Okay.
And then there's the pricing.
Mm-hmm.
People in the suburbs might be more sensitive to price than city folks. Uber's got to find that sweet spot, where prices are good for riders but also make it worth it for drivers to work in those areas.
Sounds tricky.
It's a balancing act.
So how are they managing all of this? What are they doing to make it work?
They're using technology to make sure drivers are paid fairly, even when there aren't as many ride requests. They're also trying out different pricing models, like dynamic pricing, so that the prices match how many drivers are available and how many people need rides.
Okay.
And they're adding features like Reserve,
Right.
where people can schedule rides ahead of time. Yeah, which is really helpful for commuters in the suburbs who need to know they have a reliable way to get where they need to be.
Exactly.
So it sounds like they're really pulling out all the stops to make this expansion into the suburbs work. And it's not just about ride-hailing either. They're also really focused on improving their delivery platform.
Absolutely. They're working on getting more restaurants and stores on board, offering better prices through promotions, and making sure deliveries are top-notch. They really want to make it a good experience for both the businesses and the people ordering.
It seems like Uber is doing a lot, really firing on all cylinders. They're growing their ride-hailing business, going into new markets, improving delivery, and putting money into the future of transportation with AVs.
They're covering all their bases.
They are.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room.
Okay.
The potential impact of these autonomous vehicles on Uber's business. I mean, some people see these AVs as a threat
Yeah.
to Uber's dominance.
If you think about it, if everyone has a self-driving car who needs a ride from Uber,
Right,
it's a valid concern. But Uber's not ignoring it. They're not running away from this change either. They're trying to be part of it by working with the leading companies like Waymo.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, hey, if AVs are the future, we're going to be right there in front leading the way.
So instead of being disrupted by it, they're trying to be a part of the solution.
Exactly. They're becoming the partner that AV companies need.
Right.
When those AV companies want to come to market, they're providing the network, the knowledge, and millions of riders that these companies need to be successful. And they're not just betting everything on AVs either. They're still investing heavily in their ride-hailing, making sure it stays strong even as things change.
It's like a two-pronged approach, preparing for all possibilities.
That's a smart move in an industry that's changing as fast as transportation. Nobody knows for sure how quickly this AV tech will develop
Right.
or how it will really affect the market.
Right. And it's important to remember that.
But Uber is setting themselves up to be a leader, no matter what happens.
It's like they're saying we're ready for whatever comes next. Do you think this bet on AVs will pay off?
It's the big question, isn't it? It's still early for AVs.
Yeah.
A lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
But I do think Uber's approach is the right one.
Okay.
They're not saying AVs will definitely be a huge success, but they're not ignoring the potential either.
Yeah, it makes sense.
They're hedging their bets, making
Yeah.
sure they're in the game, whatever happens with the future of transportation.
But for now, it seems like their main businesses are doing well.
They are,
And they have big expansion plans.
definitely.
It's clear Uber is more than just ride-hailing now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They're this global platform for transportation and delivery, and it seems like they're always pushing the limits.
Definitely a company to watch.
That's for sure. Who knows what they'll announce next.
Right. It'll be interesting to see.
But one thing's for sure, is going to be an exciting ride. Now let's take a closer look at those Q4 financials and see what they tell us about Uber's overall health and their future.
All right, let's get into the numbers. Uber's revenue for Q4 was a whopping $15 billion. That's a huge jump from last year. But even more impressive is their profitability.
Yeah, profitability is so important. Growing revenue is great, but turning a profit is where it's at. What did their bottom line look like?
Their adjusted EBITDA hit $1.2 billion for Q4,
Yeah.
way above what analysts were expecting. This number, this EBITDA, it really shows how profitable their core operations are. It means they're not just getting bigger, they're getting more efficient too,
Right.
which is good news for investors,
Yeah,
especially those who are worried about them becoming profitable.
exactly. Now, I remember on the call they talked about free cash flow conversion.
Right, right. Free cash flow conversion, it's basically how much of their adjusted EBITDA turns into actual cash they have on hand. It tells you how well they're managing their money and investments. And in Q4, they reach 110% free cash flow conversion.
110%. That's amazing. So they're making more cash than their earnings suggest.
Exactly.
What does that mean, practically speaking?
It gives them a lot of options. They can take that extra cash and invest it in growth, pay off debt, or even give some back to shareholders through dividends or stock buybacks.
So it's like having extra money in your pocket. You have more choices, more freedom to be strategic.
Precisely. And it shows investors that the company is in a good financial position and well managed.
Makes sense. One thing that investors are always wondering is this growth sustainable? Especially with all the economic uncertainty going on globally.
It's a fair question.
Yeah.
No business is totally immune to what's happening in the world.
Right.
But the fact that Uber has a diverse business model, these strategic expansion plans, and they're focused on growing both revenue and profits, all that suggests they're in a good spot to handle whatever challenges come up.
So they're not just relying on one thing for success.
Exactly. Their ride-hailing business is still doing really well,
Hmm.
but their delivery business is also growing like crazy, and they're making smart bets on the future with AVs.
Okay. Yeah.
Having all those different things going for them helps to spread out the risk and creates more opportunities for growth.
It's like having a diversified investment portfolio.
Exactly.
If one area isn't doing well, you've got others to pick up the slack.
That's a good way to put it. And Uber's also expanding globally,
Right.
which adds to their diversification.
Okay.
They're going into new markets with tons of potential.
Yeah.
So they're not completely dependent on any one region.
That's smart. So they're growing revenue, they're expanding internationally and becoming more profitable. But what about affordability? We talked about that earlier, especially with their push into the suburbs.
Yeah, affordability is key for them. They know that to keep attracting users and keep those users coming back, especially in new markets, the price has to be right.
It's got to be accessible.
Exactly. Especially in places where people might be more sensitive to price.
Yeah. So how do they balance keeping things affordable while still making money?
They're using their tech and their data to come up with creative solutions. For example, they're making sure drivers get paid fairly, even in areas where there aren't as many requests for rides. They're also using dynamic pricing, where prices change based on how many drivers are available and how many people want rides at any given time.
Right.
This keeps rides affordable for passengers while still making sure drivers and the company make money.
It's like this really complex algorithm, constantly adjusting things to find that perfect balance.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And they're also not shy about offering promotions and discounts to attract new customers and build loyalty.
Right.
Like the Uber One membership program,
Mm-hmm.
giving members big savings is a smart way to keep them coming back.
So they're doing a lot of different things.
Multiple strategies.
Yeah, using tech, using data, being strategic about pricing. It's all about making their services more affordable while staying profitable.
And it seems to be working.
Yeah, those numbers are impressive.
Those growth numbers show they've found a good formula.
Now let's talk about something that's been creating a lot of buzz. Uber and autonomous vehicles.
It's a big move, no doubt about it.
It is.
It comes with risks and rewards. Like we talked about before, they think AVs are the future and they want to be leading the charge.
But some people think it could hurt their ride-hailing business.
Right.
If self-driving cars become normal,
Mhm.
then do we even need Uber drivers?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a real concern. But Uber's being strategic about this. They're not trying to get rid of human drivers overnight.
Right.
They're taking it slow, integrating AVs gradually, so they work alongside human drivers.
So more of a transition than a sudden shift.
Exactly.
Right.
They're working with companies like Waymo to develop and test the self-driving tech,
Mm-hmm.
and they're using their ride-hailing network as a testing ground.
That's interesting. So they're learning as they go, getting data, feedback from riders, refining their plan as they go.
Exactly. And they're not putting all their eggs in one basket either.
Mm-hmm.
They're still investing in their core ride-hailing business,
Yeah.
making sure it stays strong, even with all the changes coming.
So they're prepared for multiple scenarios, multiple futures.
Smart move in such a rapidly changing industry.
Absolutely. No one knows for sure how fast this technology will develop or what the ultimate impact will be, but Uber's setting themselves up to be a leader no matter what happens.
Exactly.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about their plans for expansion. They've been talking a lot about growing in areas with lower population density, like the suburbs.
Right.
Why the focus on these areas? What's the thinking there?
They see a massive untapped market in the suburbs.
Okay.
As cities get more crowded and more expensive, people are moving to the suburbs, and Uber wants to be there to provide the rides they
That
need.
makes sense.
It does, but like we talked about earlier, expanding into those areas comes with its own challenges.
Well, he does.
So how are they tailoring their approach to meet those challenges? Well, they're using data to guide their decisions.
Okay.
They're analyzing each market, figuring out what suburban riders need and want,
Okay.
and then adapting their services to fit.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Definitely not. They're trying different pricing models, driver incentives, and ride options
Interesting.
to find what works best in each area.
Can you give us some examples of how they're making adjustments for suburban riders?
Sure. One example is their reserve feature, which lets people schedule rides ahead of time. This is really helpful for commuters in the suburbs who need a reliable way to get to and from work or appointments.
Yeah, no more guessing if you'll be able to get a ride on time, especially in areas where wait times might be longer.
Exactly. They're also working on expanding their network of drivers in the suburbs, offering incentives to get more drivers out there.
Makes sense.
And they're even partnering with local businesses and communities
Oh, wow.
to come up with transportation solutions that really meet the needs of each specific area.
So they're really trying to become a part of the fabric of these suburban communities.
They understand that building trust with these communities is crucial if they want to succeed in those markets.
Yeah.
And they're not just focusing on individual riders, they're also targeting businesses and organizations with tailored transportation solutions.
What does that look like? What are they doing specifically?
For example, they're offering corporate transportation programs for businesses, giving employees a convenient and affordable way to get to and from work or meetings.
It's a win-win for both sides, the business and the employees.
Exactly. They're also partnering with healthcare providers to offer transportation for non-emergency medical appointments, so patients can get to and from their appointments safely and reliably.
That's a really great example of how they're using their technology and their platform to address real-world needs.
And they're exploring partnerships with schools and universities to provide affordable and safe transportation for students.
Wow, it sounds like they're really thinking outside the box, going beyond just ride-hailing.
They're constantly innovating, finding new ways to use their technology and platform to solve transportation problems.
And it's not just happening in the U.S., they're also expanding aggressively internationally.
Right. The global transportation market is huge,
It is.
and Uber is well positioned to capture a big chunk of it.
Makes sense. They're already operating in over 10,000 cities.
Yeah, across 70 countries, and they're adding more all the time.
It's an ambitious strategy, but it could really pay off for them.
There's definitely competition
Right.
from local and regional companies in some markets.
Yeah.
But their brand recognition globally, their technology, and that huge network of drivers gives them a big advantage.
Okay, we've talked about a lot today. Uber's impressive financials, their plans for expansion, their move into autonomous vehicles, and their goal to become a global leader in transportation.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
And throughout it all, they've shown they're not afraid to try new things.
Definitely not.
They're focused on using data to make decisions, and they're willing to change with the times.
They're adaptable.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something else important. Their commitment to sustainability
That's a big deal for any company in transportation these days.
is...
People want eco-friendly options, and investors are looking at company sustainability practices very closely.
So how is Uber addressing this? What are they doing specifically?
They're doing a few things. First, they're investing a lot in electric vehicles. They've set some big goals for transitioning their entire fleet to EVs by a certain date.
That's ambitious, considering the challenges with charging infrastructure for EVs right now.
It's a challenge, but they're working on it.
Okay.
Partnering with charging companies to build more charging stations, offering incentives to drivers who switch to EVs.
So they're trying to make it easier and more affordable for drivers to go electric.
Exactly. And they're not just focusing on their drivers, they're also trying to encourage riders to choose more sustainable options.
Yes, so.
They're offering incentives for people to choose shared rides, like Uberpool,
Right.
which means fewer cars on the road.
Mm-hmm.
They're also making it easier to use public transit by including that information in their app.
So it's easier for people to plan trips that use multiple modes of transportation.
Exactly. They're encouraging people to think about alternatives to driving alone.
That's great. And they're investing in renewable energy projects to offset their carbon footprint.
Right.
So they're approaching sustainability from all angles.
I get it. Sustainability isn't just a fad.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental change in how we think about transportation.
Right.
And they want to be leaders in this change.
Okay, we've talked about a lot today. We've looked at Uber's financials, their plans for expansion, their move into autonomous vehicles, and their commitment to sustainability. What would you say is the key takeaway from all this?
I'd say the key takeaway is that Uber is always moving.
Yeah,
They're not sitting back and relaxing,
they're always pushing forward.
always innovating, adapting, pushing the boundaries in the transportation industry. They're definitely a company to keep an eye on.
For sure. Their journey is far from over. It's been a fascinating conversation today. Thanks for sharing your insights.
Happy to do it. Always enjoy these discussions.
Me too. Now, before we go, I want to leave our listeners with some things to think about as they follow Uber's story. So much to keep track of. What are some of the things listeners should be paying attention to in the coming months? What trends or developments should we be watching out for?
Definitely. One thing is to see how this expansion into less dense areas plays out. Will they actually be able to make it profitable in those markets while still keeping prices reasonable for riders? That's a big one.
And what about their autonomous vehicle goals? Any milestones or announcements we should be on the lookout for?
I would definitely keep an eye on those partnerships with the AV companies like Waymo. How quickly are those moving forward? Are we seeing any real breakthroughs with the tech or the regulations? Those things could really change the game for Uber.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how they're handling this whole shift to a more autonomous future while still keeping their main businesses running strong. Are there any other areas you're particularly interested in seeing how they develop?
I'm really curious about those sustainability initiatives they've been talking about. They made some pretty big promises about going electric with their fleet and offering more eco-friendly options. I wonder if they'll be able to deliver on those promises and how will it all affect their bottom line? That's something I'll be watching closely.
It's a tough balancing act, for sure. Trying to be profitable while also being sustainable. But it seems like they're committed to finding solutions that work for both the planet and their business.
And we can't forget about the competition. There are a lot of other companies out there in both the ride-hailing and delivery markets. How will Uber set themselves apart and keep their market share? That's another big question.
It's definitely a fast-paced industry, constantly changing. They can't afford to just sit back and relax. They have to keep innovating, keep adapting if they want to stay ahead.
And they seem to be pretty good at that. They've come a long way from their early days as a disruptor. They've definitely had some bumps along the way, some controversies, but they've also shown a real knack for adjusting to the changing landscape.
It's been quite a journey so far, and it looks like it's just going to get more interesting. Thanks so much for joining us today and for all your great insights. I always learn so much from our conversations.
It's always a pleasure, always a great discussion.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Quarterly Call. For more episodes, please remember to rate and follow our show. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.